welcome to another episode of Shit America's Cup Chat. I've got Rob with me and we've just got ourselves through the first weekend of Prada Cup racing and it has been an incredible weekend, so much to talk about. So myself and Rob, we're just going to go through team by team and just give a report card for how they fared, talk about their best calls, some positives of the setup, some negatives, some good manoeuvres, and discuss a little bit of where each team can go from here. So starting off with our home team, INEOS, let's talk about their call of the weekend. And they had quite a few to pick from, Rob, didn't they? Had an amazing weekend, 4 wins, 0 losses. But what do you think was the best call of the weekend, best tactical call?
So on the first day, I think INEOS made a great call in identifying the right-hand side of the course as being favoured. And they talked afterwards about how their weather team had seen that, and then their on-water coach had seen it and discussed it with the tactician and Ben. So Giles and Ben, they were all on the same page on that before the race even started.
Yeah, I think what was incredible about that call, in retrospect, you look at it, you're like, yes, that's a right-hand course. It was right-hand course all day. But Giles called that, and we've got the audio, which I'll play in here, but Giles called that over 2 minutes before the start, and yet neither American Magic or even Luna Rossa in the second race were discussing the right-hand side of the course.
And when we came down there, we had options for an intersection to peel out onto port pretty soon after the start.
So it's easy to say in retrospect, but it's kind of a true mark of a class sailor to be able to pick that off and pick it off with confidence so that the team follows through on it.
Yeah, I agree. And you do feel like there's a lot of trust in that team for Giles's decision making. Someone of Ben's caliber, he's got to have a tactician who he really believes in, and he clearly does in Giles.
Any of the calls that they've made that you think should have an honourable mention here?
Yeah, I think we talked about this in the crew roles, but just Giles's ability to be head out of the boat, not that involved in the physical sailing of the boat, just allows him to make a lot of good calls. He's picked a lot of good gate marks. For instance, in today's race, when they were trailing Luna Rossa went right mark at the bottom, and Giles was talking about how the left mark was 17 metres bias for quite a long way down that run. And he's got the ability to look at that, whereas Jimmy and Francesco Bruni are really focused on driving the boat. Much harder for them to pick up on those kind of things.
So on this point, actually, I've got a shout out. So this is a bit of inside intel, but Andy Bryson has been working hard at INEOS on the tactical software. And obviously it's Giles who's constantly relaying these ley lines and, course awareness stuff to Ben, which the other boats don't really have that kind of feed of communication on the boat, or not that I'm hearing. But obviously behind the scenes as well, I think INEOS do have a bit of a tech advantage there in terms of their tactical software. That's what I'm hearing from the inside anyway. So I've been told to give a shout out for Andy Bryson on that one. Yeah,
that's interesting because Andy's been with that team for a long time actually now. He was there in the Benenzi racing days, and he's probably been there since the beginning actually.
So, right. I think Giles' call of the weekend, has to be before that first race, because it just kind of set the tone in terms of that confident approach and just correct. I mean, he's not really made a wrong call of the weekend, but that one set the tone. So I think we're going to put that as call of the weekend. Right, positive setup note. There's quite a few that you would say are positive setup notes for INEOS especially after the America's Cup World Series where they were terrible. But what do you think has been their kind of like biggest positive about their setup for this weekend, Rob?
I think the biggest positive setup's got to be their upwind pace. And it's easy in the context of their World Series results to say, oh my God, it's a massive turnaround. But they've got good upwind pace. They seem to sail a different mode. And actually, they've just got good pace in general. In today's racing, they were the same as Luna Rossa upwind, but had a noticeable speed advantage downwind. And while manoeuvres are kind of important, speed is king. So it's really nice to see INEOS at least on a level playing field on the speed front. And
I think, at least if they're on par speed-wise, then that really enables them to bring into play the numerical advantage they have in the aft guard.
Yeah, I agree.
Which again, I think is one of the positive setup notes, is, one of the positive things they've found about their setup. And obviously we were questioning it in our video on the crew roles of INEOS. We were saying, look, they've got 5 people effectively driving and thinking this boat around the course. Does it really need 5 people? Can 5 people effectively communicate quick enough? And, we were wrong. Well, effectively, weren't we? I definitely do think that was a positive in their setup for the weekend, was basically the Giles Scott free tactician role. That if you look at their boat, what made the difference? Yes, they were on par setup-wise in terms of speed, or maybe a click advantage here and there, but nothing night and day. But I'd say the thing that made the difference from the weekend in terms of their setup and how they utilise their tools was having Giles, sitting there at a loose end, nothing to do except make 100% correct calls all the time.
I think there's another thing about that team, and it's a very strong belief that if Ben Ainsley has equal equipment to his competition, he will win. They just believe that Ben will win, and he's proven that time and time again, as long as his equipment is on par. And those guys turned up to the World Series, the G-Sail GP in the F50s, stepped in the boat and absolutely destroyed everyone on equal equipment. So, I mean, Ben really showed his class again, didn't he?
Right, moving on. A negative point about their setup. Was there anything that you felt didn't work about their setup this weekend? Where would their kind of area for concern be? It's hard. There's not much that went wrong.
I mean, they made a couple of small mistakes, didn't they? Today in the first race, they ended up getting abandoned. They had an out-of-bounds penalty in the pre-start. So there was obviously a distraction that caused that.
Yeah.
And it
could be the huge waves.
It could be the huge waves. It did also feel like on the first day in their race against American Magic, when they started to the right, it doesn't feel like INEOS necessarily have that high mode to live off someone's hip. And again, we saw that in the race against Luna Rossa today, where Luna Rossa actually opened the door for them at the starboard end when it looked like INEOS were going to be late. And as a result, Ben called for the tack, and then he changed his mind to a hold. And then Luna Rossa really had that high mode to squeeze them out when they needed it. So I do wonder if there's a little bit of the boat's got a great pace setup when it's in the groove, but if they have to sail outside of that, say high slow for a while, does it do that well?
They have to be sailing their own race. I think for me on the boat setup, I think 4 wins, you can't argue with that, but here I'm going to try. I still don't see an America's Cup winning boat there. I see the team, I think the crew roles, I see that as America's Cup winning team, but the boat isn't a standout boat yet. I don't think they're in the position yet where they can make bad calls and still win races. And I think upwind they were kind of on par, downwind they had a bit of an edge on Luna Rossa, but it was also a pretty lucky weekend for INEOS in terms of who they matched up against when. Yeah. You kind of feel if they were racing against American Magic today, they wouldn't have won, because basically they won today on a speed advantage downwind over Luna Rossa, which I don't think they would have had against American Magic. Obviously, if American Magic capsized, then they wouldn't have won, but they were kind of lucky with that. They were lucky to race against American Magic in the light, when I think if they raced against Luna Rossa in the light, they might not have won. So looking at the boat this weekend, if the races had fell differently, you know, they could have been, you know, 2 from 4 instead of 4 from 4. And they were also lucky that they had the first day, doing their 2-day race on the first day when there was more breeze. You know, they could have been 2 races on the middle day.
I totally agree with you. I still see a scenario where you've got 3 boats that are strong in different areas. And we saw a dog at the World Series, and now we've seen something that's vaguely competitive, but we're just not. I'm more than vaguely competitive. We're not quite sure it sits though. Do you see that? Do you see that boat beating the Kiwis yet?
Not yet, no. That's it. I think it's for me, it's still, you know, they've got a race boat now. The boat alone, ignoring all the crew, ignoring everything else, I just don't. It's not quite. And obviously, they've made huge bounds since the America's Cup World Series, and that must have taken a Herculean effort. However, those people in the team aren't going to get any rest because they've just got themselves back to par, basically. And now they need to do that again, I think, to catch up with Emirates. But let's talk about their best boat manoeuvre and worst handling mistake. So
I think this is between 2 things. In their race against Luna Rossa on the first day, they did an incredible lee bow tack on the final approach back to the start line, which I think all of us watching kind of couldn't believe they did. It was almost a 180-degree turn on the foils, full speed. Even Luna Rossa thought they were going to get the hook, and then weren't even close in the end. So that was a pretty amazing tack. And then the other thing I saw today was I really like what they're doing at the leeward marks with the twin foils in the water. This was something they even identified on the first day. It's a bit of an issue. They were doing a big skid around the leeward mark. And I wonder if this twin foil in is a way for them to make that leeward mark turn more effective. The boat looks like it's on rails as it's going around that mark. And
yeah, that was a really interesting thing today and a good spot, and it's certainly something the other boats aren't doing. I'm not sure if it's just condition specific in the waves, just to, you know, if there's a chance one foil might pop out, it's good to have the second one down to catch you.
And we've discussed this as well, that we're not quite sure on what the rules are in regards to what foil control you're allowed to do when both foils are in the water. But INEOS have 2 flight controllers, so they do potentially have the ability to put negative lift on that windward foil.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a rule about negative lift on the foils. However, even if there's no negative, even if it's just neutral, then it's going to add stability, and it's going to. So, do we need to call this new manoeuvre, something?
Yeah, well, it looks like they're on rails, doesn't it? So, what about Thomas the Tank Engine or something like that?
I've said this before, and my name's Thomas, but I want to call it the Thomas because it's a tank engine on rails. So, but I'm sure they'll come up with something else to call it for the double full down. But you did hear them discussing it on the way into the leeward mark.
So I feel like INEOS need to up their game in the creativity department on naming manoeuvres.
Yeah.
Sounds boring Brits.
Right, and their worst handling incident, and this is a funny one. So one of my mates picked this up. Shout out to Mitch Webb, who was watching the live feed, and you know, I think it's fair to say Team INEOS haven't dropped a catch all weekend, except for this guy on the who's trying to catch the banana bag and does a terrible job. So yeah, he goes down as worst handling mistake of the weekend. So no one's dropped a catch but him. There you go. All the bananas are in the sea.
He's certainly not wearing the All Blacks, is he?
No. Right, we'll call it a day there for INEOS Team UK. Most valuable sailor, definitely Giles Scott. Had a cracking weekend. We're going to get back tomorrow with report cards for Luna Rossa, and then the following day, American Magic. So much to say after that weekend. As ever, thanks for the view. So thanks for all the new subscribers. I hope you're enjoying the content. Yeah, it really took off, and even got a few messages of the support on Facebook. One really stood out, and it was from a chap called Nick Hutton. Now, looking at his Facebook profile, he must be a huge INEOS fan because he's got all their team kit, lots of pictures of the boat. Nick was really impressed with our thorough research on the INEOS team roles video. I think he wanted to hear a little bit more about his favourite INEOS jib trimmer, which is Chris Brittle. So yeah, there you go, Chris Brittle. You've got a big fan in Nick Hutton.